President Dye, fellow Rotarians. I think it's not just fitting and proper, but very exciting that today's Rotary meeting is at the Appel Center on stage. And Todd, thank you for being such a great host to us today. If you look at the 27th largest Rotary club in the world and the York Symphony Orchestra, they're two organizations that have a lot in common and have a lot of connectivity. First of all, they're two of York's most iconic and venerable institutions since their founding. Secondly, there is tremendous Rotary representation with the symphony. And so many people are involved that I can't name anybody, but let me just give you an example of some of this connectivity. First of all, 4 Rotarians serve on the board of the symphony. 4 Rotarians sing in the chorus. 2 Rotarians are on staff. And many Rotarians have even played in the orchestra over the years, including world champion with 56 years of trumpet virtuosity contributed, Chuck Long. Where's Chuck, our trumpeter emeritus? And we really want to thank all the Rotarians because in addition to all that direct participation, countless Rotarians are subscribers to our concerts, attend our concerts, and are financial contributors to our organization. So we appreciate that very much. So when I was asked to join this venerable and iconic organization, I was thrilled, not just because of its stature in the community and because of its rich tradition and history. One of the reasons I was so excited was I thought that the orchestra had a unique opportunity to make even a greater contribution as a positive force in our community. If you look at that timing, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, and York's downtown revitalization was well underway. And if you look at all the cities that have had successful resurgences, a thriving symphony orchestra has been a common denominator. So there was a lot of potential, but there was a lot of work that needed to be done. About 4 years ago, our audiences had dropped to about 400 people. So a revitalization was definitely necessary. So the first step in our revitalization was to do a national search for a music director. And that search led us to the internationally acclaimed Star-Spangled Banner conductor, Dr. Lawrence Golan. And since joining us, Lawrence has really added a lot of excitement to our programming. He's enriched the audience experience, established good connectivity with the community, with our donors, with our attendees. And the results of all that, in addition to the improved musicality of the orchestra, is that our audiences have more than doubled. We're selling over 1,000 tickets to our concert. We've sold out our concerts many times. And if you look at where we stand today versus the same time last year, ticket sales are well ahead of last year. The second step in the revitalization was to do a national search for a general manager. Our talented development director, Rotarian Dick Brown, was needed to really focus his entire time on cultivating our donor base. So someone to come in and be the chief operating officer of the orchestra was very important. And that national search led us to another talented individual, Michael Reichman. Michael, and I'm sure you all, because he's a fellow Rotarian as well, I'm sure you've got a chance to know him, but for those of you who may not know this, he has a bachelor's degree from the University of Nebraska in flute performance, a master's degree from New England Conservatory in conducting, and he's attended the University of Virginia's Darden Business School Management Development Program. Michael was a general manager of an orchestra in New England prior to joining us. And since arriving, he's improved our operations, improved our administration, improved our sales and marketing, and he's connected well with our community as he and his wife Liz have put their money where their mouths are and moved downtown and become active in the downtown revitalization scene themselves. Later in the program, Michael will formally introduce Maestro Golan, but to kick off our program now, please join me in welcoming our General Manager, fellow Rotarian, Michael Reichman.
Thank you very much, Bill. So before I begin, I just want to say a thank you to Eric Menzer and the York Revolution, because they inspired this program, believe it or not. As you know, the Rotary Club does a pretty regularly annual meeting at the York Revolution once a year just before their season kicks off. And I thought to myself, well, you know, everyone loves athletes. We all love musicians too. Let's get some excitement and let's see if we can get the Rotary Club to come here and have some fun and tell you about our upcoming season. And here we are, and I'm very, very excited for this opportunity. And I also thought, you know, there's a lot of similarities between the two organizations. We're both a team. We are both athletes. You know, we have to use our muscles. I mean, you know, look at that bone right there. You know, that's. And then we both have to wear uniforms. We are just like the big famous athletes. We're both grossly overpaid with multi-million-dollar contracts. And you know, who knows? Maybe when we both go out on the field, we have to wear some sweat resistance to, you know, prevent ourselves from getting too sopping wet when we're sitting on stage too. So I see a lot of similarities here, and I hope you will indulge us in that. So I have a question for all of you. And please feel free to raise your hand. How many of you like music? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, yeah, I think most of you do. Okay, now I have a second question for you. How many of you like symphony orchestra music? Now, before you raise your hand, just so you don't feel pressured to respond yes, the good news is I will turn around. I won't even look, so I won't know if you've raised your hand. So that's the good news. The bad news is if you do raise your hand, Dick Brown's going to find you and ask you for a symphony donation. I'm just kidding, Bert. We're not soliciting or anything up here. I'm just kidding. All right. So I want to ask you a few questions. I've asked you how many of you like symphony orchestra. So why don't you all go ahead and raise your hand. All right, now you can go ahead and put them down. And I'm sure that all of you did, in fact, raise your hands. But in case you didn't, I have a subsequent question for you. How many of you like Glenn Campbell? Raise your hand if you like Glenn Campbell. Okay. Then I have another question for you. How many of you like the Beatles? Raise your hand. Okay, very good. Now, another question. How many of you like Billy Joel? A lot of you. All right. Well, you would be interested to know that all of those musicians have worked extensively with symphony orchestras, not just playing with an orchestra as their backup, but have written music that goes exceptionally well and written specifically for orchestras. In fact, with the Beatles, George Martin, who was known as the fifth Beatle, was their orchestrator, and he was known to be an integral part of their songwriting process and how they came up with a lot of their instrumentation. And Billy Joel, of course, is a very avid classical music fan as well. So when you think of orchestras, you may be thinking of this in a hall where you are supposed to remain dead silent without any emotion expressed on your face at all. But chances are that you do like orchestras. You may just like them in different contexts and may not even really be thinking about it. And that is the topic that I want to launch this discussion is that the orchestra, especially in the United States, we think about them as this mausoleum where we are always performing music from way back when. And I think it's important to know that that wasn't always the case, and that throughout American history, the orchestra has played a very central role in our cultural lives, and that has changed as the years have gone on. And I think it's good to help you see that and realize that, because I think it's really interesting. And I full disclosure, I'm not a licensed scholar on this subject, but these are things that these are points in history that I think are interesting, and I think that they can create a narrative that may be illuminating. So let's start with one of the oldest orchestras in the United States, the New York Philharmonic. They were actually founded in 1842, if you can believe it. Now, like I said, you may be thinking of orchestras as these mausoleums, but in 1842 and through most of the 19th century, these orchestras were premiering music by Beethoven, by Handel, by Mozart. A lot of them were doing that. And that was the function that a lot of them served. They were premiering, and you could think of them almost like the MTV of the day. You know, they were the ones that were playing some of the hottest hits, and people would go to the concerts to see, well, what's the latest thing that's happening? And if, you know, maybe if MTV doesn't strike your fancy, if you're of a certain age, maybe Dick Clark's American Bandstand, and, you know, maybe, hey kids, who's ready for some Mozart? But throughout the 19th century, this is one of the main roles that a lot of orchestras were playing. They were playing music that was either freshly premiered, and certainly if you're talking about the New York Philharmonic, and they're playing music premiering music by, say, Beethoven or Handel. That hasn't even gotten to, say, famous composers like Tchaikovsky or Wagner, who are still alive and vibrant and composing new music. Brahms, I could go on. So I think it's a very interesting dichotomy to think about when we look at the orchestra in that part of the 19th century. And as that century continues, we get other orchestras that pop up. We have the Boston Symphony Orchestra in 1881, the Chicago Symphony in 1891, the Philadelphia Orchestra in 1900, and the Cleveland Orchestra in 1918. And when you add in the New York Philharmonic to that, we get what we often call in the orchestra world the Big Five: the Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Cleveland. And even to this day, we as an industry look to them as the big players in the game. Now, certainly there's many other huge orchestras, but the venerated institutions that have been around for this long, that's what we look to as the Big Five. And as I was saying, that's the role that I think a lot of them really played in that part of the 19th century. Now, when we enter the 20th century, we really start to see the orchestra as an institution take a very centralized role in American culture. And I want to give you a few examples that I think illustrate this. The first one would be Arturo Toscanini. Now, some of you may know that name, just you may not know who he is or why you know that name, but Toscanini was a very famous Italian conductor. He emigrated to the United States just before World War II. And he did lead the New York Philharmonic, but one of the other orchestras that he was famous for leading was the NBC Symphony Orchestra. And by NBC, I mean NBC, the major national broadcasting corporation. And just think about that for a second. The major radio station and the major media outlet in the United States, they had their own symphony orchestra, and they were making national broadcasts to millions of people every week. It's very different than what we think now, because now you may think of an orchestra recording being relegated, if you will, to National Public Radio or some satellite radio station, but this was mainstay, and everyone was really experiencing it. So that's one example with the NBC Symphony Orchestra. And broadcasting was one of the innovations that the orchestra was really able to take advantage of. Another example of that would be not just playing classical music like we know it, but what we would call pops music that's a little more popular and mainstream, and that people may have who have a wider musical palate taste might enjoy. And that's when the Boston Pops, which became founded. Although it was founded not too long after the Boston Symphony was founded in 1881, it really became an American icon in the 20th century with the music director Arthur Fiedler. And they were featured on national television frequently, and their concerts on Christmas, New Year's, and July 4th were some of the things that Americans would look forward to. Some of you may even recall watching it on your television during those holidays. They were very big during the American Bicentennial in 1976. And in 1971, the Boston Pops was invited to do the opening of Walt Disney World. And they were featured, they were one of the main featured groups to inaugurate this, what is now one of the biggest amusement parks in the world. And that's how the Boston Pops, one of the examples of how the Boston Pops was such a central figure in American culture throughout the 20th century. Another example, we talked about the New York Philharmonic a bit, but also, for those of you, some of you may know the conductor Leonard Bernstein. He was music director of the New York Philharmonic in the middle part of the 20th century, and one of his most iconic pieces that he did was a TV series called Young People's Concerts, where he introduced young children to classical music, and he would also make tie-ins with popular music as well. And these were nationally broadcast on CBS as well. And so again, you're seeing this way of how the orchestra itself is really seeped into the mainstream culture of the United States. Another example I would give you is Leopold Stokowski, who was famous for being music director of the, well, he's famous for being a lot of different things, but music director of the Philadelphia Orchestra, and he was featured in Disney's Fantasia that was in 1941. So you can, again, it's another example of how integral orchestras were at that point. Another point that I think is also worth noting is how corporations really saw sponsoring it as a market opportunity. It wasn't just philanthropic. They saw themselves as, oh, people are coming to the orchestra concerts and we want to make sure we're marketing and advertising them. And there were these things called affiliate arts programs that were prominent during the 60s and 70s, where you had Exxon, Texaco, and Xerox doing sponsorships to bring in conductors and train them to become successful in their careers. So, those are some points that I think are interesting when you're looking at what were the ways that the orchestra was prominent in the 20th century. So it leads us to the next question of what are orchestras doing today? We're now in the 21st century. Media and music consumption has changed incredibly. You now have iTunes, you now have Amazon, you now have YouTube, Netflix. You can consume more than you could ever possibly desire. And how are orchestras responding to that now? What are they doing that's trying to address the shifting landscape? And I have a few examples that I think are interesting. The first one that really catches my eye is the San Francisco Symphony. They have a relatively new series called Soundbox, where they have a nightclub that they perform in downtown San Francisco. And they work with a light show and different indie musicians from San Francisco. And they are really, they also, you can see in the top photo, they involve cocktails and food, and they are really trying to make it a holistic entertainment experience that reaches younger audiences, but also broadens their reach as well. That's one way that a major orchestra is trying to address this. Another one is the Detroit Symphony with their Mix at the Max. This is a black box theater at in Detroit, and they bring in hip-hop duos and beatboxing trios that combine their classical music talents with some of the more modern aesthetics and tastes, and it's become very successful at all of our orchestra industry conferences. We all look to the Detroit Symphony for some of the innovative things they're doing. Also, another one would be right near us at the Baltimore Symphony. It's called YSO Pulse, where they are also working with a multimedia experience of lighting, staging, visuals, and working with indie rock bands as well to tie it in with the classical music that they're presenting. Those are some of the ways that orchestras that are big institutions have been trying to address this shifting landscape. A couple other ones that are not main American orchestras would be the YouTube Symphony Orchestra, which was a project that started in 2009, and what it was an orchestra assembled by open auditions hosted by YouTube and the London Symphony Orchestra. And you submitted your audition tape on YouTube, and then if you were selected, they flew you into Carnegie Hall to do a live concert streamed on YouTube, and then a couple years later it was all done at the Sydney Opera House as well. And this was a national sensation, and the live stream of the grand finale concert at the Sydney Opera House in 2011 was the largest live stream YouTube ever made, connecting 30.7 million streams, and it broke the record for the largest number of live YouTube views, even beating the Irish band U2, not to be confused with YouTube. And that was one of the most successful classical music experiments that has been done on a multimedia platform. And then the final one that I wanted to address, which I think is also something that shows how orchestras are trying to get into the mainstream just a little more, is with this Amazon Prime. Some of you may know that they are producing their own TV series. Well, they've created one about an orchestra, and it's called Mozart in the Jungle, and it's if you combined a show about orchestras with All My Children or The Young and the Restless, really combining the soap opera with the orchestra, and it's created some very interesting television watching. It is one of the most viewed programs streaming on Amazon, and it was also nominated for multiple Emmy Awards. So those are the ways, some examples that I see the orchestra is trying to get more in the mainstream now, just like it was in the 19th and 20th century. And what this will lead us to is the next part of our presentation, which is how the York Symphony Orchestra itself is trying to do this. As our board president, Bill Hartman, said, our maestro Lawrence Golan has really worked hard to create innovative and exciting themes that our music in concerts can engage the community, and we are working with very interesting collaborations and partnerships this year with different venues, not different venues, but different vendors, restaurants, and I think that this is a way that the orchestra, the York Symphony Orchestra, can help permeate the community of York County even more, to show how relevant we are and how exciting our music can be. So at this time, I'll move on to the next part of the presentation, and I will turn the stage over to Lawrence Golan. For those of you, for most of you, he is someone who does not need any introduction. However, for those of you who may not know our maestro as well, I can tell you that he is a very, very busy man. In his spare time, when he is not conducting the York Symphony Orchestra, he is music director of the Yakima, Washington State Symphony Orchestra, the Denver, Colorado Philharmonic Orchestra, and he is a full tenured professor of orchestras and conducting at the University of Denver in Colorado. So he is a little busy, as you could imagine. He has a beautiful wife, Cecilia, two adorable children, Giovanna and Joseph. They make their home in Denver. He is a graduate of the Indiana University Jacobs School of Music and my proud alma mater, the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Maestro Lawrence Golan.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and great to see you all again. As Michael mentioned, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our upcoming season, which actually starts this weekend. The theme for our classical series this year is a world tour, a musical voyage around the globe. Each concert on the classical series will focus on music from a different country or region. In addition, we have forged many community connections with different restaurants and other organizations to turn each concert evening into a multi-sensory event, including thematically related music, food, drinks, and dance. We begin in the Mecca of classical music with Prost, a toast to Oktoberfest and Yorktoberfest, featuring our new concertmaster, Denise Dillenbeck, who I will introduce later in the program. This concert will include music from Schubert and Mozart, as well as the joyous Symphony No. 2 by Johannes Brahms. Before the concert, King Brat, a popular new participant in York City's taste test competition, will be providing an array of delicious bratwurst, and Winridge Farm will showcase a sampling of their seasonal beers and ciders. After the concert, Brown's Orchard will provide an autumn-themed dessert reception. Finally, for this concert, the YSO will be partnering with Yorktoberfest to provide a joint ticket package to their annual beer and wine festival happening that same day. For the next stop on the York Symphony Orchestra's world tour, we present When in Rome. Not only will we perform Italian composer Otorino Respighi's masterpieces, The Fountains of Rome and The Pines of Rome, but we will also perform two great works written by non-Italians while they were on holiday in Rome, namely Tchaikovsky's Capriccio Italien and the Mendelssohn Piano Concerto No. 1, featuring Italian pianist Roberto Plano, who was the gold medal winner of the Cleveland International Piano Competition. And for this event, we'll be partnering with both Caputo Brothers Creamery and Tutoni's Restaurant. Next, we travel south of the border. This energetic and colorful program includes music from and inspired by Cuba, Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. Our guest artist will be Mariachi Champaña Nevin from San Diego, considered one of the finest mariachi bands in the country. Food will be served by Mi Caldero and El Serrano restaurants, and we will also have a pre-concert performance by the Latino dance group called Spanglish. Our travels continue in March as we present a Celtic celebration. Mendelssohn's Scottish Symphony will be followed by Sean Davies' The Brendan Voyage. This epic Irish work for bagpiper and orchestra traces the legendary journey of St. Brendan across the Atlantic in a leather boat. Our featured piper appeared on the soundtracks of such blockbuster films as Mel Gibson's Braveheart and Steven Spielberg's Far and Away. Joining us for this concert will be Oxford Hall, a Celtic eatery based in New Cumberland, as well as the Nerayan School of Irish Dance. Finally, we will be partnering with the York St. Patrick's Day Parade to provide a joint ticket package to their annual There's Guinness in It event. The next stop on our tour is back in the USSR. Speaking of the Beatles earlier, we will perform two of the greatest pieces by two of the greatest composers of the Soviet era, namely the monumental Symphony No. 5 by Shostakovich and Alexander Nevsky by Prokofiev. This dramatic work, featuring the York Symphony Chorus, is one of the very few film scores that has found a permanent place in the standard symphonic repertoire. Food for this concert will be provided by Goldie Market, a specialty Russian and Eastern European deli based in Harrisburg. We conclude our musical voyage around the globe back home in the USA on Armed Forces Day with a program called American Classics. This will be a patriotic concert, including the Armed Forces Salute, Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, Copland's Appalachian Spring, and two pieces to celebrate Leonard Bernstein's 100th birthday, the composer's Candide Overture and his symphonic dances from West Side Story. There will be a color guard presentation, and we will be partnering with many of the various veterans associations around the county as a salute to our men and women in uniform. And for this concert, our culinary partner will be Leg Up Farmers Market. Next, we move on to our pop series. One thing we endeavor to do at the York Symphony Orchestra is have something for everyone. If you like Beethoven and Mozart, we've got Beethoven and Mozart. But if you like Motor Booty Affair and ABBA and the Village People, we've got that too. And in fact, we start with that this weekend, and we have some cards on your tables about this opening night concert, which is called Classical Night Fever. Now, Michael had some questions for you. I've got some questions for you. Are you ready to get down tonight? Because there ain't no stopping us now. For the first pop concert of the season, the York Symphony Orchestra will be joined by Motor Booty Affair, the ultimate disco tribute band. If you plan on staying alive, you should be dancing as we burn, baby, burn in this disco inferno. We're right down the street from the YMCA, so be a macho man and break out those platform shoes and bell-bottoms. Oh, what a night it will be. An annual York tradition, the Holiday Pop Spectacular, will feature all of your favorite Christmas carols and holiday songs. In addition to the York Symphony Chorus, the orchestra will be joined by Gettysburg Children's Choir, giving this year's concert an especially youthful character. It's a 4 p.m. matinee, so you can bring your kids, your grandkids, and anyone else with whom you'd like to share this heartwarming holiday event. Then you can join guest conductor Kelly Corcoran of the Nashville Symphony and recording artist Mandy Barnett for April in Paris. The program will feature some of the most beautiful French-inspired love songs made famous by Cole Porter, Count Basie, Maurice Chevalier, Edith Piaf, Ella Fitzgerald, and Frank Sinatra. I don't like to name drop, by the way. And then the last concert on our pop series is the magical music of Harry Potter. The Harry Potter phenomenon includes 7 books and 8 blockbuster films. The York Symphony Orchestra will be playing the musical highlights of all of them. From the Sorcerer's Stone to the Deathly Hallows, we'll chronicle the adventures of the young wizard and his friends as they battle the dark forces of the one who shall not be named. So that's an overview of our season. We look forward to seeing you at all of our concerts, including this opening night concert this Saturday. Now, there are several musicians from the York Symphony Orchestra. Some of the key musicians or principal musicians are here today. And I would like to ask each of them to stand as I name them and also tell you how long they've been with the York Symphony Orchestra. So please stand wherever you are, my colleagues. Nick Maziot, principal trombone, who has been with us for 1 year. Okay. Well, he was here, and in fact, he played for you earlier on the Star Spangled Banner. Eileen Shea, assistant principal cello, 6 years. Jill Hoffman, principal oboe, 8 years. Carrie Harker Roth, assistant principal viola for 15 years. P.C. King, assistant principal trumpet for 21 years. And there's Nick also. He has re-entered the room. Venona Dietrich is a section violinist and the Chuck Long Award recipient. She's been with us 29 years. Karen Botterbush, assistant principal flute, with us for 32 years. Beverly Butts, our principal clarinet, for 33 years. Dwayne Botterbush, assistant principal bass, for 35 years. Gary Morton, our principal timpani, for 41 years. And Dave Hershey, principal percussionist, for 44 years. Now, joining these longtime members of the orchestra, we have our very newest member, also I'd say it's an understatement to say a key player in the orchestra. The concertmaster, our new concertmaster, is here. Now, first of all, what is a concertmaster? A concertmaster is the first chair violinist of the orchestra. He or she is the leader of the entire string section, and really the leader among the musicians of the entire orchestra. So it's absolutely a core, extremely important member of the orchestra. Now, we had an opening for concertmaster after our wonderful concertmaster of 30 years, John Eakin, retired 2 years ago. And we went through an extensive national search, in fact, international, technically. Anybody could apply for it. We announced it in a variety of ways on Facebook. We sent the announcement to all the various conservatories in the orchestra, the various conservatories in the area, other orchestras, and really got the word out and had a tremendous response. And then the next part of the process was the preliminary round. And for this round, we had the people play behind a screen. Nobody knew who they were. There's no regard for race, for gender, age, or even experience. It's simply how the person plays. And for that, we had a committee of principal members of the orchestra who listened to the preliminary rounds, and I am not involved with the preliminary rounds, so they, on their own, choose a handful of finalists. And then we take the screen away, we can see who they are, look at their resumes, and look for relevant experience, and I joined the committee for the final round, and ultimately one person stood above the rest, and we engaged them to be our next concertmaster. Our new concertmaster has toured Europe and America with the Philadelphia Orchestra, has played with the Baltimore Symphony, the Pennsylvania Ballet Theater, Philly Pops, the Seattle Symphony, and many other orchestras across the U.S. She is currently concertmaster of the Yakima Symphony Orchestra, Silitz Bay Music Festival Orchestra, Lake Chelan Bach Festival Orchestra, and the Northwest Sinfonietta. Here now, to give you a sneak preview of what she will perform at her debut performance with the York Symphony Orchestra on October 14th, accompanied by Ken Osowski on piano, please welcome the York Symphony Orchestra's new concertmaster, Denise Dillenbeck.
Thank you so much for such a lovely performance.